Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 232. The Perrignon family. In St Michael's Church in Deniliquin, there's a number of stained glass memorials. One of these is dedicated to Theodore Perrignon from his mother. Who was Theodore Perrignon and what was his connection to Deniliquin? Theodore Perrignon was born in 1864 in Maryborough, Victoria, to Claude Francois Perrignon and Sarah Jane Duff. His father Claude was born in 1828 at Montigny-la-Reslay in France. He departed France in January 1855 on the La Lucie to Melbourne. He arrived on the 8th of March 1855 and made his way to the goldfields. His mother Sarah was born in 1841 in Mossmore County, Tyrone Island, and she was 13 years younger than Claude. Sarah arrived on the Victory to Melbourne on the 4th of November 1857 when she was 16. Claude and Sarah had 8 children, their first being born in 1862 in Maryborough, Victoria. In 1871, one child was born in Wagga, and from 1872, 3 children were born at Terrick East near Echuca. Claude was naturalised on the 26th of March 1872. They did not marry until 1881. They married at the manor at the Echuca Presbyterian Church. The reason why they didn't marry until 1881 was that Sarah had been married to James Dunley. They married at St Mary's Catholic Church at Castlemaine in 1860 when she was 19 and James was 20. However, the marriage mustn't have lasted long, as the birth of Claude and Sarah's son, Claude Nicholas Perrignon, was in Maryborough in 1862. When she married Claude, Sarah said she'd had no knowledge of James Dunley for 21 years, so since basically the year they got married. Claude died on the 7th of June 1883 in Echuca, aged 55, when his youngest child was only 7 months old. On the 11th of June 1883, in the Echuca Riverine Herald, it outlined his death of an old resident. We have to record the death of a late respected resident of Terrick East in the person of Mr. Claude Perrignon. The deceased gentleman had been ailing for some months from paralysis. He'd lately got very much worse and succumbed to his illness on the 7th. His funeral, which took place on Saturday, was attended by a large number of friends who showed a large tribute of respect to the deceased gentleman. The deceased gentleman leaves a wife and family, part of whom are growing up to mourn his loss. And on the 24th of July 1883, in the Kerrang Times and Swan Hill Gazette, in the Equity Court on Friday, His Honour, Mr Justice Molesworth, granted probate of the will of Claude Perrignon of Terrick East, farmer, to his widow, Sarah Perrignon, the sole executrix. The testator died on the 7th of June 1883, leaving a will dated the 25th of September 1882. The deceased was possessed of personal property at the time of his death at the value of £1,090, all bequeathed to his wife. And on the 21st of September 1891 in the Echuca Riverine Herald, the Murray River Stock and Station and Commission Agency Company Limited are instructed by Mrs Sarah Perrignon to sell by public auction the following: the lease for 3 years of 512 acres of land at Terrick East, securely fenced, well-warded, comfortable residence and all necessary outbuildings. We are requested to state that the above property must be leased, as Mrs Perrignon has taken up land in New South Wales and must fulfil the residence clause. Also at the same time, 200 acres of growing crop of wheat, very forward, now growing on part of the above land. The terms 3 months approved bill. And in the Deniliquin Pastoral Times on the 29th of January 1921, it announces the death of Sarah Perrignon. The death occurred at Ripponlea, Victoria, on Sunday of Mrs Sarah Perrignon, a resident of the southern Riverina for many years. With her husband, the late Claude Perrignon, and family, the deceased went to reside at Terrick East in 1874, where she was well known and highly respected throughout the district. The latter part of her life, the late Mrs Perrignon spent on her property Craigydale near Moolameen. She was 83 years of age and is survived by 3 sons and 2 daughters. Her body was brought to Echuca for interment. On the 6th of September 1939 in the Sydney Morning Herald, in the Equity Court, alleged breaches of trust, Clark versus Perrignon. The court has been engaged for several days in hearing an administration suit in relation to the trusts of the will of Mrs. Sarah Perrignon, formerly of Craigydale, Moolameen, who died in 1921. Mrs. Perrignon left surviving her a daughter, Mrs. Mary Clark, and a son, Mr. George Henry McCramer Perrignon. Each has 3 sons, and these 6 grandchildren are beneficiaries under the will. Mrs. Clark and her sons are plaintiffs in these proceedings, and the defendants are the sons of Mr. Perrignon, who is a trustee. Mr. Perrignon himself and Mr. G.J. Monaghan of Barham, his co-trustee. By her will, Mrs. Perrignon made several small bequests and then gave her estate to her trustees on trust for her daughter and grandsons. Briefly, the will provided for an annuity to Mrs. Clark, a payment of £300 to Mr. Perrignon, on the youngest grandson attaining 21 years. The principal asset in the estate in New South Wales is a grazing and farming property of 1,929 acres. Mr. G. Perrignon had leased this property from the Testatrix in 1915 for a period of 10 years, and the will contained a provision as to renewal. Mr. Perrignon was also the owner of an adjoining property. The plaintiffs allege that the estate had been administered by the trustees for the benefit of Mr. Perrignon. They allege breaches of trust in the expenditure of money belonging to the estate on repairs, alterations and improvements, in raising money by mortgage for purposes not authorised by the will or by law, and in respect to the terms of the second lease given to Mr. Perrignon. They also complain that the defendants repudiated an indenture which was executed in September for settlement of matters in dispute between them, and under which it was agreed that the plaintiffs should be paid £750 each. The defendants deny the breaches of trust alleged. In regard to the indenture of September, the question arises whether the document, not having been signed by all the Perrignon grandsons, was binding. And on the 23rd of September 1939, the hearing was resumed, with His Honour, Mr. Justice Nicholas, dismissing the claim of the plaintiff beneficiaries for specific performance of an agreement executed in September, but reserved judgment on the remaining issues. And on the 22nd of March 1940 in the Sydney Morning Herald, application to vary decree. An application under the Moratorium Act was made by Mr. G.H. Perrignon of Craigydale, Moolameen, for an order deferring payments ordered in the suit of Clark and others versus Perrignon and others. The defendants in the suit, heard in October, were beneficiaries in the estate of Sarah Perrignon, and the plaintiffs were by the decree appointed new trustees. By the decree, the present applicant and Mr. G.J. Monaghan were ordered to pay to the new trustees of Mrs. Perrignon, on or before the 31st of December 1939, a sum of £661, and a further sum of £383, being interest on a loan in respect of the property of the estate leased and occupied by the applicant. The applicant now asks that payment be deferred on terms that he reduced his liability at the rate of £150 a year, first payment to be made on the 31st of December of this year. The application was dismissed. On the 11th of October 1946, in the New South Wales Government Gazette, regarding the will of Sarah Perrignon, formerly of Craigydale, Moolameen, in the state of New South Wales, but late of Elstonwick in Victoria, widow deceased, the probate was granted by the Supreme Court of Victoria on the 23rd of July 1921. The trustees hereby give notice that the creditors and others having any claim against or to the estate of the said deceased are required to send particulars of their claims before the 15th of December 1946. Her children: Claude Nicholas was born in 1862 in Maryborough, Victoria. He purchased property at Moolameen, New South Wales on the 6th of August 1885 with a total of 640 acres. On the 21st of June 1895, Intercolonial News in Victoria. The customs officials recently seized 2,000 sheep and several head of cattle on the border near Echuca for alleged non-payment of duty. The Commissioner of Customs has dealt with the matter, with the result that the owner, Claude Perrignon, has been fined £500 for illegally importing stock. The animals will be detained pending payment of fine and duty. And then on the 5th of July 1895, so only a few weeks later, for smuggling cattle at Echuca, Claude Perrignon has been fined £275. 3 months later, in the Deniliquin Pastoral Times. At the Deniliquin Supreme Court, civil sittings, Alexander William Bremner of Moolameen versus the Union Bank of Australia Limited, damages of £750 for wrongful seizure of sheep alleged to be purchased from Claude Nicholas Perrignon, who gave security to the bank over certain specified stock and after acquiring the stock as well. Then on the 21st of January 1896 in the Echuca Riverine Herald, a charge of cattle stealing, a well-known stock dealer arrested. A warrant has been in the hands of the Moama police for the arrest of Claude Perrignon, the well-known cattle dealer of this district, on 2 charges of cattle stealing. On hearing of the warrant, Perrignon proceeded to Moama and gave himself up. The warrant charges him with stealing 3 head of cattle from a farmer named Lennon of Moama and a cow from a butcher named Bell of Moama. At the police court yesterday, Perrignon was brought up before the bench. He was first charged with stealing the 3 head of cattle, but the police were not able to obtain the attendance of certain witnesses, and they asked for a remand, which was granted, bail being allowed in the accused's own surety of £200 and 2 sureties of £100 each. The charge of stealing a cow was then entered into and formal evidence taken. The police also asked for a remand of the case, which was granted, bail being fixed in the same amounts as the first case. This was heard in the Deniliquin Criminal Sessions on the 10th of February 1896. The case attracted much attention as the accused is the person who lately was fined by the Victorian Customs Department a large sum of money for smuggling cattle into Victoria. Under cross-examination by Mr. Pennyfather of Melbourne, who appeared for the accused, the identification of the cattle broke down and Judge Forbes directed the jury to acquit the accused. A second charge against the same person of stealing Mr. Bell's cattle was adjourned to April. On the 26th of February 1897, in the Riverine Herald, smuggling pigs. At the Numurkah Police Court on Wednesday, Claude Nicholas Perrignon of Tocumwal, who is known in this district, was fined £25 with £9 and 16 shillings costs for evading the duty on 8 pigs in December. Claude then moved over to Western Australia on the 23rd of May 1902 in the Perth West Australian Worker. Claude Perrignon, a good unionist and late of Norseman, AWA, has had a lot of hard luck in Menzies. Amongst his trials was a fire which left him a close call from being burnt to death. It is pleasant to hear he is well again and has secured a fair-sized contract with the North Coolgardie Roads Board for road work between Leonora and Lawlers. And on the 7th of March 1903 in the North Coolgardie Herald and Miners Daily News, at a special meeting of the North Coolgardie Roads Board on Thursday, the tender of Claude Perrignon was accepted for repairs and improvements to embankments and culverts. He was living in Mount Ida in 1906 and his occupation was recorded as a teamster. On the 14th of March 1908 in the Perth West Australian, in the bankruptcy notices, it lists Claude Perrignon of Goongarrie, road contractor and sandalwood cutter. In 1913, he was living at Quairading and working as a contractor, which was in the York area of Western Australia. On the 8th of July 1914, an article featured him in the Perth Daily News. Claude Perrignon, who was declared bankrupt in 1908, came up for examination. At the time of his trouble, he was a contractor at Coolgardie and subsequently a sandalwood cutter. He owed £517 to 36 creditors, one of whom was Evan Roberts, who took action against him under the Masters and Servants Act for £18 and had him put in jail. He had started in the sandalwood business through assistance to the amount of £200 given to him by one Weaver of Menzies. In consideration for this, he had transferred all his rights and title in 500 acres of grazing leasehold at Beverley. Another cause contributing to his insolvency, in addition to the failure of the sandalwood cutting business, was the failure of a man named Bromley, who lent him in for £140. He was now the holder of a 1,400-acre CP in the Wickerpan-Merredin district. This has had taken up with financial assistance from his brothers. He has made improvements on the property and had applied to the bank for assistance, but they would not grant it, except with the official receiver's sanction. If the way were made smooth for him by that sanction, he would have no difficulty in selling the property in 12 or 18 months for a good sum, which would enable him to pay all of his creditors and would leave something for himself. In 1934 and 1937, he was working as a shepherd at Calabarin, and he died in June 1938 in Perth, aged 76.
Interestingly, as mentioned, Sarah died in 1921, so well before he did. However, it seems that Claude was not listed on her will. Sarah and Claude's second son was Theodore, who was born in 1864 in Maryborough, Victoria. He died in September 1908. The Deniliquin Pastoral Times had his obituary. The death occurred at Nema Bridge near Moolameen on Friday of Mr. Theodore Perrignon, whose family for many years had been well known in the Echuca district. For a number of years they resided at Terricks East, where they were highly esteemed. Subsequently, the family settled on the Nema River between Echuca and Moolameen, where they established a very successful grazing farm. The late Mr. T. Perrignon, who was apparently well and strong when he sat down to dinner on Friday, was no doubt seized with some mortal affection of the heart, for suddenly, uttering a few indistinguishable words, he fell back and expired. Great sympathy is felt for the family in their loss. The people of the district, in order to mark their respect for the deceased, conveyed his remains to Deniliquin, a distance of 60 miles. The body was then taken by rail to Echuca, where the funeral took place on Monday afternoon. The family were devout Catholics, and Monsieur Tracy, who was the priest at St Michael's Catholic Church in Deniliquin, officiated at the funerals of the family, and no doubt this is why Sarah Perrignon placed one of the lead light windows in there as a memorial to her son at the Deniliquin Church. The third child, John, known as Jack, was born in 1867 in Maryborough, Victoria. He died on the 26th of November 1882 on the Goulburn River at Canyapala at Echuca. On the 28th of November 1882, the inquest was outlined in the Echuca Riverine Herald, and the following evidence was adduced. George Bell stated that on Sunday the deceased himself and his brother went to bathe in the Goulburn River. The deceased and himself were a little way in the river when the witness heard his brother calling out that the deceased was sinking. Witness looked towards the deceased, who was a little higher up the stream than himself, and saw him struggling, apparently sinking. The witness swam to his assistance, but before he could reach him, he had sunk. The witness could only swim a little himself and could not dive. He did not see the deceased rise again. He immediately gave the alarm to a young man named Shaw, who ran up to Stewart's Hotel. He could not say whether the deceased could swim or not. Robert Bell, the brother of the last witness, stated that he saw the deceased walk into the river about 3 or 4 yards. He then began to struggle and it appeared he was sinking. He called his brother's attention to this and he tried to go to the assistance of the deceased, but before he could reach him, the deceased had sunk. The witness was standing on the bank of the river at the time, dressed. He had been bathing in the same place, though not so far out in the stream as the deceased. The bottom of the river sloped at this place, and they always looked upon it as a safer place to bathe. He could not say whether the deceased could swim or not. Claude Perrignon stated that he was a farmer at Terricks and Canyapala. The deceased was his son, aged 16, and was attending the witness's selection at Canyapala. He could not swim, to the witness's knowledge, though he may have learned to do so within the last 2 months. Constable Harris stated that he recovered the body of the deceased from the Goulburn with a drag. It was lying in about 15 feet of water, about 20 yards from the place where the deceased sunk. Dr. Osborne made a post-mortem examination on the body. The appearance of the body indicated that the cause of death was asphyxia from drowning. There were no marks of violence on the body, nor any indications of cramping. A verdict was returned that the deceased accidentally drowned whilst bathing in the Goulburn River at Canyapala on Sunday, the 26th of November, 1882. Claude and Sarah's daughter, Mary Ann, was born at Mallorca, Victoria on the 13th of August 1871. Mary married James Warren Clark on the 14th of January 1899 in Wagga, New South Wales when she was 16, and they had 9 children. On the 24th of December 1898, James owned the Royal Hotel at Moolameen. James died in January 1941, and it was announced in the Deniliquin Pastoral Times. He died in Wollongong and was for years the licensee of the Royal Hotel in Moolameen. And Mary Ann died on the 22nd of March 1944 in the Sacred Heart Hospice at Darlinghurst, New South Wales. The next child was Margaret Clementine Perrignon, known as Clem. She was born in 1872 in Victoria. She married James Robb in Victoria on the 17th of April 1912 when she was 40 and James 34. Their marriage was announced in the Melbourne Australian. On the 17th of April at St Killian's Church in Bendigo, James Robb of Moolameen, New South Wales to Margaret Clementine Perrignon of Moolameen, New South Wales. Present address, Wondelli via Goondiwindi, Queensland. Margaret died on the 4th of November 1944, aged 72. Her death announcement states, on November the 4th at Goondiwindi, Queensland, Mrs J. Robb, formerly Clem Perrignon, of the Terricks, Victoria and Moolameen, New South Wales, aged 72 years. Old friends contact W. Clark, 76 Grey Street, St Kilda. On the 9th of December 1944, in the Balranald and Moolameen Riverina Recorder, there was an obituary for Clem. Mrs James Robb. The death occurred at the Goondiwindi District Hospital on Saturday, November the 4th, of Mrs James Robb of Allandoon, Yellowbon. The deceased lady had been in poor health for some months and had collapsed at her home a week before her death. Mrs Robb was keenly missed in the Yellowbon district, where she came as a bride with her husband 32 years ago. By reason of her kindly, generous nature and her ever-ready wit, she was a lady known and liked by everyone. In this war and in the last, Mrs Robb was a tireless worker and generous donor to all descriptions of welfare work for soldiers, and she was one of the originators of the Yellowbon Soldiers Memorial Hall. Her home was known as an open house, where hospitality and kindliness were unstinted. Mr and Mrs Robb were pioneers in the Wondelli Creek settlement, and the hardships and trials of the earlier years have given place to the greater ease and comfort which they have fortunately been able to enjoy together in later years. For the past 14 years, Mr Robb has been a member of the Wagaba Shire Council, and for the last 2 years has been Deputy Chairman, in which office he has been well supported by Mrs Robb, one of whose last official acts was entertaining the State Governor, Sir Leslie Wilson, on his recent visit to Yellowbon. Mrs Robb's funeral was widely attended. Mrs Robb was Miss Margaret Clementine Perrignon and was born in Victoria. She came from a pioneering family of the New South Wales Riverina. She and Mr Robb were married in Bendigo in 1912 and came to Allandoon in that year. It was characteristic of her that she kept in touch with her friends everywhere, and many messages of condolence and sympathy have been received by Mr Robb from friends all over the Commonwealth. She's survived by her husband and 2 brothers, Mr Harry Perrignon of Randwick, New South Wales, and Mr George Perrignon of Moolameen, New South Wales. So the next child born was George Henry McCramer Perrignon in 1877 at Terrick, East Victoria. He married Jeannie Margaret Humphreys on the 3rd of May 1910 in Yarraville. They were married in the Roman Catholic Church, and Jeannie was the eldest daughter of George Humphreys of Ballarat. He was 33 and Jeannie 24 when they married, and they had 5 children. In 1918, they were living at Craigydale, Moolameen, and in 1928 in Echuca. And George died on the 16th of April 1951 at Barham Hospital, aged 74. The Hay Riverine grazier placed his obituary in the paper on the 27th of April 1951. Mr George Henry Perrignon, one of the Moolameen district's best-known residents, was in his 77th year and passed away at Barham on Tuesday after a brief illness. The funeral took place at Barham on Wednesday afternoon and was largely attended. The next child was James Butler McIntosh Perrignon, who was born in 1877 in Echuca. He worked with his brother George on the property Craigydale near Moolameen in 1913, and he died on the 18th of August 1914 in South Yarra. His death was announced in the Riverine Herald, the Echuca paper, on the 21st of August 1914. On the 18th of August at a South Yarra private hospital, James Perrignon, 4th son of the late Claude Francis and Sarah Perrignon of Craigydale, Moolameen. Rest in peace. The 9th child was Henry Butler Perrignon, who was born on the 21st of May 1882. On the 11th of October 1911 in the New South Wales Government Gazette, it announced that Henry Butler Perrignon, a clerk, was employed at the Department of Public Works, and he was now being appointed as a clerk in the Department of Navigation. He married Esther Mary Ryan at Randwick, New South Wales in 1912. He was 30 and Esther 32. They had 3 sons. In the New South Wales Government Gazette on the 28th of February 1936, it announced that Henry Butler Perrignon, DEC, Clerk, Department of Labour and Industry, was now to be Clerk of the Department of Navigation and Department of Public Works. He died on the 4th of December 1947 at St Vincent's Hospital, Darlinghurst, at the age of 65. It was lovely to research for this episode, as the only prompt that I had was attending a service in the Catholic Church in Deniliquin and looking up at the lead light and seeing a name that I didn't recognise. So it was interesting to investigate who Theodore Perrignon actually was.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast, Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.